Great. Welcome back. And now I will introduce our new speaker of the day. So I'm very happy to present to you Ursula. Ursula, she's working in Amazon Web Services, Nordics partner CTO. She works as an architect in technology industry, and she knows for her expertise in enterprise architecture, especially around database, maximum availability, security, and privacy. As I said from previous speakers, I don't know what I'm talking about, but hopefully Ursula will explain us. Her industry specialties are in banking and healthcare, and she has a I really like these sentences. She has a unique neurodiversity skill set that can be described as high velocity problem solving, and she has taken it around to the world when she was working in the Thomas Curane's War Room team. If you are ignorant as me and you thought that she was a general in war, actually he is not. I Google him. He is a current CEO of Google Clouds. In parallel, in a workday, she's an active human rights campaigning, and especially in the area of LGBTQ+. And she's the lead for the Mimit. I would like to ask you what is it? Mimit Coda I was Amazon Web Services and Amazon Nordic program, a project to train new unrepresented skills in technology industry. Therefore, you are in the right place today, Ursula, because we are represented international women that are very unrepresented in the tech industry in Finland today. So welcome. I will now stop my sharing and please you can start yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction and thank you for having me. So I should now be sharing my screen. So you're seeing my slide. Good. All right. So, hey, very nice to meet everybody and thank you for inviting me. So you heard my introduction and I'm actually thinking about today doing a session of, we typically call this kind of a session of Ask Me Anything. So let's use the time and get to know each other, and happy to answer questions both related to the career journey, my personal journey, and no question is off limits. You can always ask a question when it's coming from a right place. So please feel free to ask questions. You can drop them in the chat and we can stop, we can take a pause, we can talk about it. But yeah, let's get going. So I was thinking I could do a bit of an introduction both on my career role and also on my personal role, like what makes me me, so that you understand who I am. And then we can actually talk about certain learnings I have been able to gather that work for me and some of my team members along the way. So like I said, my role is a technical architect. I'm a solutions architect, and I've been a solutions architect for let's say best part of 15 years. So I've been in different architect roles, leading enterprise wide business transformation. But typically what that means in practice is that I work directly with customers or I work directly with partners and we build solutions together. And the solution building usually starts from a question or a need or requirement that somebody says, hey, we need to build this. So you heard my introduction and you probably noticed that there were words like healthcare, banking, etc. So my focus typically with solutions that I've been building with teams have been in the healthcare industry. So they can be like hospital-wide environments. They can be countrywide, they can be Europe-wide, they can be global environments. And they can also be banking platforms, for example, payment processing. So let's say that when you use your card and pay something at the register at the local supermarket, most likely that transaction that goes through the bank and all the payment platforms, I probably have been building that at some point of my career. So I'm mainly focused with data. So I'm not necessarily your typical front-end developer, even though I do work with front-end developers quite a bit. You may notice that on my screen, I have another title. So you see a title called Partner CTO for the Nordic countries. And so I do have a double role. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that at this point of my career, it has taken me to a place where I took on something that we call a C-level role. And that C-level role means that I'm leading certain activities for certain groups with my partner organizations. So even though I'm still technical, I'm still doing the architect work. I lead business development actions together with my partners, and my partners can be different size companies. So they are basically, they can be the Accentures, they can be the Tietos, but they can also be small startups. So I help business development to guide them through of building a business. And what I usually remind when we do things like these sessions is that when you see like a whatever impressive title, you think like, oh, that's cool. Have a think about like it's usually a journey. So typically nobody starts off with having a, let's say, a CEO title or CTO title. It's a kind of a, it's a place in your career, but you also need to figure out if that's the place that you want to get to. So it's not always that somebody has to say you have to follow the same footsteps. No, not necessarily. So what do you want to do? So whatever I share along my journey has made sense to me. And have I made mistakes? Have I failed along that journey? Yes, I have. And I'm very open about it. So I also have done things for the wrong reasons. And I also do talk about that. So let's get going. So I will share a bit about what I do daily and also what's it like to work for Amazon and what kinds of companies I have worked for along my journey. So keep in mind, everything is a journey, it's a path, and it's not always straightforward. So let's start with who I am. So like I said, my name is Ursula Koski, my pronouns are she and her. And yes, I'm a technical architect. My career at this moment is about 28 years. And it usually makes the audience smile when I say that, and I'm trying to explain to our teenagers that I'm 27. And they say like, probably not, because if you have 28 years of career behind you, probably you're not 27 anymore. But basically, it has taken me a while. I was very lucky to be offered the role very early on. So I have always known that I have a passion for technology. So my passion for technology started very, very early on. So I was actually exposed to different kinds of technologies. And I was the one who wanted to take everything apart and see how that works and how do you fix it if you break it? And sometimes I broke it, I couldn't fix it. So it's basically been in my DNA that I love tech and I want to understand how things work. And that comes along with not only tech, as if you look at computers and how the systems works, also if you look at engines, how engines work and why do they work that way. On a personal side, so I'm originally from Finland. My career has actually made me travel quite a bit. So I have worked around the world, and if you look at the places I've visited, I've been very, very privileged to be able to work in parts of the world that I could never have afforded to live in. I also have been able to experiment many, many company cultures. So being in those roles, being a technical resource, I also have been a consultant that has been going from country to country, or let's say doing issues management, problem management. I have the opportunity to go actually to different countries to see different companies without being a permanent hire to those companies. So that's been something that I really, really enjoy. That's my professional side, and I will talk a bit about the different points in my career and how I landed on those. On a personal side, like I said, I'm a human rights activist. Typically, if I want to keep it very simple and explain it in simple terms, I say I'm openly gay, but that's not really how it goes. So I'm actually pansexual. And that means I don't really care about if my partner is, what my partner's gender is. And if you want to make it funny, you can actually say that I'm a sapiosexual. So I need to have a mental connection or a challenge that I fall in love with the brain. That has taken me to a point in my career that I also want to do certain things that are the non-technical parts of what I do. So the non-technical parts of what I do is also, I want to build a community where everybody can be themselves when they work at the workplace. So have that sense of belonging. But it's also a very challenging role because you do know we are now in the Pride Month, and many companies, they go around and use the Pride flag and talk about it and say like, yay, we support you. But there's one part in belonging that is really, really difficult. And I think many of you can also feel this one when I say that if you go to a workplace that is, let's say it's male dominated, or let's say that it's very, very certain group, like culture-wise, certain group, certain language, if you don't have anybody else who looks like you, who is like you, who has the same background as you, having that sense of belonging is very difficult to gain. So, for example, for me, when I went through my studies, I was usually the only woman in the room. So there was 30 men, and then there was me. So it was like boys and Ursula. And also, when I started talking openly about being gay, it's also like there's nobody else in there. And that sense of belonging goes also further up. So if you want to be the CEO or CTO, you have to have that representation in the company on different levels. So that's really critical. And that's what we are actually building now with Amazon and Amazon Web Services, that we do have diverse voice. We have different cultures and we support everybody, but we also need to investigate what kinds of biases we hold, because we all have biases. We have those that we don't recognize, so those kind of that are lying underneath the surface, and of course those that are intentional, that they are biases that we actually own up to and we know that they exist. So how do you work through those as an organization, and how do you mitigate that bias, that you know that we are not on the same starting line always? So long explanation of why I do the certain activities. So I'm a co-leader for Amazon in the Nordics, and the Amazon in the Nordics is an affinity group for Amazon and AWS. And that affinity group leads all the LGBTQ plus activities across Nordics for both companies. I'm also a board member for Black Employee Network. And then people might say, like, hang on, Ursula, you're white. What do you mean? It's also to show support, to be part of that, to support that change, that we also need to have that place and that voice for unrepresented voices in companies in Finland, in Nordics, and globally. So that's basically, you could say that I have a technical role, and then I have this passion project role. And like I said, I took my time traveling the world. I think I was traveling almost a decade without really having a permanent place. So I typically always returned home. And why am I here? So I'm actually back in Finland. And I'm here because COVID happened. So I got the opportunity to decide where I would like to stay when COVID actually hit the world. So I was then in New York. I was working there for a project. And then we got a question. I was still working for my previous company, which was Oracle. Where do you want to stay if this takes a long time? We don't know how long it takes. And then you needed to make that decision. And that actually landed me back in Finland. So that actually brought me back. And I joined my current role. So I joined Amazon and Amazon Web Services in the middle of COVID. So I got hired in the middle of COVID, which means that all the interviews, everything was virtual, which is kind of good and bad at the same time. So of course you don't have to travel for your interviews. You can do them from your living room couch. But of course, they might be a bit more tricky to read the room and to understand what's happening there. And also introduce yourself, your personal self, share bits of yourself. That is also that having a coffee together with somebody. So yeah, we were middle of COVID, and I basically came back to Finland to this. And I felt that I returned to my home country. So it felt like coming back home. And I actually came back to the Finland archipelago. So this is the part that I feel like most myself. And that kind of ended my part of that decade worth of traveling the world, being a nomad, being a globetrotter. And here I am. So, but let's talk about the role, and let's talk about the journey and the different opportunities that I have been having throughout my career. So let's start with the role that I at the moment have. So like I said, I have the CTO and Senior Solutions Architect role, and it's a mix of two worlds. So that mix of two worlds is, of course, the business and enablement side, which basically says that the business that you do has to make sense also financially. So basically, whatever you do it also in keeping in mind that you're doing this professionally. You're building something that should be able to be reused. And that's basically the business enablement side of that. Who am I doing it with? Like I said, I'm doing it with different companies, and I'm doing it across Nordics with different size companies. But I have a technical role, and I actually do have a technical passion. So what does that role look like? And we have a really long explanation of what is the technical architect role in my current position. But if we try to summarize it, it looks like something like this. So we use an abbreviation of PMSA, which is Partner Management Solutions Architects. Try to say that quickly. So what does a solutions architect do? It doesn't really matter if you're a senior architect or if you're a management architect. What do they do? So we actually help the partners, so those of our customers who provide services on top of Amazon Web Services, which is the cloud infra, the global cloud infra, to actually thrive, to offer their offerings, whatever they are offering, whatever solution they are building, to do it in a controlled way that actually scales. So it's more tactical. We also focus with the partners on how to offer those offerings to the market, to the customers that they are providing the offering to. And we also challenge them. So we look at the technical side of things, what can be improved, how can we make it more secure? And also, how do you offer that to the market so that whoever is aiming to buy that understands what they're buying and why is it the best solution for this specific scenario? So it's a multitude of different kinds of enablement. So it can be technical workshops, it can be boot camps, it can be architecture planning sessions, and it can be from size of a tiny project to humongous, let's say that healthcare project that spans over the whole, like the whole hospital infrasystem. So it can be different size, but it uses the certain best practices that we have built in the company in order to actually cater to audiences that use our platforms. So that's what the partner management solutions architects do. And like I said, you can be as technical as you like. But maybe I'll stop here before I talk about my professional journey. I will talk about kind of the time span of which things have taken place in. So like I said, I have 28 years behind me and hopefully a lot more ahead of me. So do you see any questions in the chat, or is there anything else that you would like to know about what I'm currently doing, or for example, anything that I mentioned about affinity groups?
I don't see any questions in the chat, but I have a question of my own.
Yep.
When you're talking about this PMSA role,
yep.
And in the morning we were, the first session, we got a new term. We learned business technologies. So I would kind of try to understand what is the difference between them, and in my head, business technology is something that unites business and technology and looks the company inside. You know, how can a company drive its business results better with its existing technologies? So am I right that the PMSA is more, you know, kind of aligned towards what's happening outside the company? Like, how is the company attracting customers with its services and so forth? Like, is that the different?
Yeah.
Or maybe you can help me out here.
Yeah, definitely. So if you look at the part of PMSA, if you look at the last two letters, so SA can be in different positions, either inside the company, so supporting, let's say, internally inside AWS or Amazon, supporting technical solutions architecture building. So when you have a PMSA, so basically you have a partner-facing SA, even though it does have that business aspect in there, but it's highly, deeply technical. And yes, it's outward facing. So for example, for me, whenever I build anything or participate in anything, there's always partner involvement. So there will always be a solution that is also outward facing in ways of it's not only for one customer, it's usually to multitude of customers, and it's offered by our partners. So that way it's always interacting with external parties, supporting them, being their resource. And one question that I actually get often when it comes to Amazon Web Services is that, okay, hang on, you have a lot of essays, that's cool, that's nice, interesting role. How does it differ from, for example, if you're a consultant? So the difference, if you look at like your traditional consultants that go into the projects and they may spend in the projects, let's say, when I was a consultant, I may have spent 2 years at the same customer. I was typically the billable consultant. So every hour that was at the customer site or I was working with the customer was billable hour. For example, PMSAs, that doesn't work that way. Yeah, and typically it doesn't work that way also for the SA roles. So the roles that are provided to customers or partners or even internal people, so they actually are there to support that technical development and solutions building. But they are not billable in ways of like, hey, I will go and count my hours, in ways of, hey, I will bill you 1 hour of that 1 hour of work. We offer the essays or PMSAs based on need. And of course, we ask a lot of questions because we don't have like unlimited amount of PMSAs or essays. So we have to ask questions of, hey, how long, what do you need, what are you building? And sometimes we also challenge the partner and say, no, that's not a solution that we can support because of these and these things. So it's typically very data-driven exercise. So I hope that answers at least somewhat like how I see the difference with those roles.
Okay, interesting. Could it be also said that business technologies, combining business and technology is also kind of a, let's say, smaller part of what PMSA people do, or what it includes?
Say so. I would definitely say so. So it's combining a lot of also business development side. It may have components like sales cycle development of how do you sell a product that's already, let's say that it's technically advanced, but how do you position a product? So even though, of course, it's a lot of technical explanation and talk and description, but it also has to have those competitive advantages. And that way, yes, it's also a business development activity or sales enablement activity.
Very interesting. We have also one hand up. Christella has a question.
Please go.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for that. So back to the affinity groups, I actually just went on to the website. And yeah, well done, I think, for Amazon for actually having these affinity groups. Very interesting point in Africa that I think people are not necessarily aware of is we talk about Black empowerment quite a lot, okay? But I think one of the things that the international community does not understand is that within Black empowerment, Black people don't empower their own people, so they oppress their own people, okay? So I think, there's almost like a need for an affinity group of the oppressed, if I can put it that way. And then in the South African context, what you find now is that the concept of apartheid has actually swapped around, where the white South African, and I'm not comparing our lifestyle or whatever back to what it was for the Black people back in apartheid or whatever. There were some really bad things, but I don't think the international community is aware of the oppression that the white person in South Africa and the brown person and the Indian person in South Africa is actually living under.
Christella, sorry if I'm...
I think,
yes.
Yeah, I think that this is a discussion that can go very long, and perhaps is something that we should serve for another session. Thank you for your insights, and let's say that if you want to discuss this more, maybe you can, continue that discussion later on, and we can kind of focus here more on the IT roles and what we were planning for today's session. Ursula, would you agree to continue?
That's fine.
discussion later.
We can do that, and like I said, we can always run a separate session on this. It's a really broad topic, like I said, so
Yes.
also network on that. So so maybe I should actually share a bit about like that whole overall journey, so you get an understanding, because like I said, it's not like I landed in this role just like I became a CTO and that's it. So let's look at the roles that I have done. And like I said, I really loved all the tech stuff. So even growing up, I really loved that. But I have also been quite fortunate in my professional journey to be, let's say, in a way, in the right place at the right time. Or let's say that I always found a way to figure out what is the need at the right time. And that means I also been able, and I will share in the last part of my session, like how, but I always had the opportunity to find somebody who would mentor me, that I would become an apprentice, for example, for certain lead architects in my previous companies. So like I mentioned, last about maybe 15 years, I've been participating in a role which is in a certain level of architecture building, so a certain level of architect. And that has come from junior to senior to lead architect, etc. And majority of the projects and things that I have been leading are hospitals, healthcare, banking. But funnily enough, in that combination, I also have had quite a bit of casinos. And some people may ask, like, why casinos? Why have you building for those? And the commonality here is the criticality. And the criticality can actually stem from the fact that it's either critical in ways of it has a lot of money attached, which is typical for, of course, banks. And also it's time sensitive. And also that relates to casinos. So it is time sensitive. It has a lot of money flowing through. Or in the hospital sense, it's critical in time sensitivity, but it's critical to also something that is much more valuable than money. So basically human lives. So basically worked with high critical cases. So I have been with AWS for 2.5 years. Before that, I worked for Oracle. So I was actually a transformational architect. You notice that there was a mention about war room lead. A war room lead means that I have been leading cases when there's a critical issue, and that critical issue is impacting, let's say, healthcare industry, it's impacting a bank, it's impacting any of the global services. And we need to get to a resolution, to an end goal, like how do you fix this? And after fixing it, you need to analyze why did it break, and has the fix been a permanent fix, or is it a temporary fix? And a personal note on my side, I have a bit different wired brain. So the way that my brain works, it's very highly analytical, and I love data. So I have always loved data professionally, personally, in all the ways, shapes, and forms. So I love books, I love data, I love analyzing things. And that's one of the reasons it took me to that kind of a role. But majority of my journey with Oracle, that was about 13 years long, was with these kinds of customer spaces. What's the commonality of that 13 years? Was that actually the things, the builds, whatever we were doing were basically ramping up. So they were ramping up from easier to much more challenging. So I always got the opportunity to kind of ramp up and go to the next level to find how would I challenge my brain next? And that has allowed me to learn along the way. So I advocate a lot for the fact that it's a learning journey. And it's also okay to say, I don't know, or it's also okay to understand I can fail in this process. Because if you're never failing, you will never ever like completely succeed, because you're not taking any kind of risks. So you need to also find a company that you can do that in. So you have that challenge, but you can also understand that there can be failure. But when you find that failure and say, this doesn't work, this is not functional, you have to also understand you found one way that doesn't work. You need to find the way that works. So before I actually became an architect for Oracle, I worked for a local company in Finland called Tietori. You might have heard of that company. And I got to lead the role of being a business consultant, teaching about database services, And one thing I noticed in previous sessions was that somebody mentioned that when you can explain something to 5-year-old, then you actually understand it. And it really resonates with me, because when you can explain something simply, when you can say, hey, this is how it works. I remember explaining to my grandmother how database clusters work and what are the challenging bits. And she went like, yeah, I get it. Then you know that you have really understood it yourself. So if it makes sense to somebody who's not technical, you probably then understand it well. I got a few opportunities also before Tietori. So I got to build my career and actually do a learning journey or like an internship at Siemens before joining Tietori. And I did it in Siemens, Germany. And that was one of the parts in my career journey where I actually threw myself at something where it didn't necessarily always make financial sense. So I got offered an internship role in a situation where I already had a permanent job in a very appreciated technical institute. And I decided to take that role, even though it made less money than I was making at the time. And the reasoning in my head, and I still believe strongly in this, is that because I will challenge myself in that role. So the Siemens role made sense because that allowed me to build my career and understand the systems better. So actually my career started, which is a bit odd place to start from, is I actually started as a lecturer and a teacher. And I started by visiting a local school that I was also attending, and they mentioned that they have a lack of technical expertise in their teaching staff. And they had a lot of situations where people would drop off because they were so tired and they didn't have, there was a lot of health issues and such, and understaffing was an issue. So I found my point in time where I was like, I can learn this one. I can actually learn to teach these components and make them explainable. And they didn't offer me any kind of agreement. So basically they offered me, hey, if you want to pop in and see if we have something for you, please do so. And in 2 years' time, I was able to build myself a full-time role in that institution, which basically started from me popping in there and going like, hey, do you have coffee? So sometimes you have to start somewhere where nobody is promising you anything. So you have to be there at the right time, and you have to be able to do a good enough job to make sense to the company. So that's what my career path looks like. Then what I would like to share with you is also what is a typical case and what are the typical challenges that these days you might see in the line of business that I do. And I will talk about the technical challenges. So typically when I go in any kind of situation, when we are building something, when we are developing something completely new, it might be that somebody says, no, this is quite simple. It's just this piece of what we are building. And there you have to be very mindful. And that's one of the learnings I've come very close to is that when somebody explains, this is very simple, this is what we are building, they might be looking at the solution from one part of the room or through a keyhole. And I mean with that let's say somebody's saying it would have to do that function well. That is the function that makes sense to them. They don't necessarily see the whole picture. And I can share like a career story, and this is quite old already, but I started with the healthcare institution and hospital system. And I got the explanation of, no, it's simple, this is what we need. It's logistics, it's hospital logistics, it is real time, it is critical, but these are the integrations we need. And then the question was, how many integrations do you have? Well, we have about 5. About 5 integrations, it's quite simple. It will take about a year. That's what we have estimated to get to the end result of what we are looking at currently. And okay, beautiful. So I jumped in, took my team, started building. From that 5 integrations, it grew into 195 integrations, and it built into a humongous infra. So when you have that keyhole, when you see that this is what we are building, you have to ask a lot of questions. You have to be very curious. So to just like quickly show you what it looked like at the end, it's like a maze. So that's what's basically my career has been about. then what I get questions on and questions about is, why are you an Amazonian? Like, why are you part of that company? And so, as you probably do know, and most of you know, Amazon. So Amazon is, of course, a huge company that started off with the bookshops, online bookstores, etc., grew into a global business that is selling much more than books. Amazon Web Services is a part of Amazon, but it's that technology part that's lying underneath the Amazon web shops. And one of the challenges of the early times of Amazon and Amazon Web Services was that we were reinventing the wheel quite a bit. So there was a lot of, hey, let's build this, let's build that. And the process kept spinning. So basically, when we were building storage, when we were building databases, whatever we were building, could be that actually you were spinning the same wheel and doing certain errors, failures all over again. So we built mechanisms that allows us to do scalable solutions building. And those mechanisms actually support us really well. And at some point in time, we noticed that actually this is something that we could offer to external parties, not just for Amazon, even though that the Amazon web shop was humongous. And that's where the Amazon Web Services journey started from. So how do you make scalable mechanisms, scalable services, secure services, and offer those in a global range, in a scalable way, in a price point that makes a difference, that is understandable and usable, and also data-driven to customers other than just Amazon. But that doesn't quite explain the fact that, okay, the technology is there, it's amazing. There must be something else. So why are you there? So why did you choose to leave yet another technical role that you actually did get to challenge yourself in? And I would say for me, one of the biggest parts of becoming an Amazonian was something that we called leadership principles. And the leadership principles, what we use are both Amazon and Amazon Web Services shared leadership principles. And those leadership principles set certain guidelines or best practices, if you may. And they may resonate with you or they may not resonate with you, but basically these are the jointly agreed leadership principles. And you see a lot of in there. So I'm not challenging you to read this slide, but you see that there's customer obsession, there's ownership, there's invent and simplify. And first time when I saw this, before I was even talking to the team that I was going to get hired in, I was like, yeah, well, I've seen this before. Like, yeah, you just talk about this and then you don't do anything about it. So that's probably it. And that's not true. So actually, everything that we do daily is actually run based on these principles. One of the things that might jump out from this slide when you look at it is that some of them might either overlap or then they might conflict. And that's for a purpose. So these are best practices that we use in everything that we do. And sometimes you might have strong suits in some areas. And then again, you might have areas that you need to improve as a person in the other area. So for example, let's say for me, what's typically seen for me, I have very strong ownership. So if I'm owning something, let's say it's a project, it's a process, it's a problem solving, I own it. So if somebody says that it's your responsibility to fix it, I will own it to the brink of I will break myself to own it and fix it and make it work. But it's also kind of my failure because the ownership can be a bit too much. So then you have to look at certain other parts of the leadership principles. For example, you see there's a frugality. Frugality means that you have to do whatever you're building or whatever you're innovating, do it with a sense of resourcefulness and sufficiency, and also making it in a level that it scales. So also like over quality can be an issue if you're trying to aim like too high. So how do you make it also frugal? And there's a lot of things that resonated with me. And I had a long discussion when I was actually doing those sessions for maybe joining Amazon. And I was like, there are some things that really, really resonate with me. We have one overarching principle of these leadership principles, and that's the first one. And that's one of the main reasons that I joined Amazon, is that we are something called customer obsessed. So we start everything from customer. So whoever the customer is, it can be the main website of Amazon. It can be the smallest startup that has 2 people working for them, but it has to start from a point of what is needed, what is meant to be built, and then we work back from there. How do we get that to that end goal and build that? And that really resonated with me. So that was really critical piece for me to say, yes, this is how it should be, because oftentimes we are building things to satisfy the need for example, let's say that you have a brilliant mind who's building an amazing technology solution and challenging themselves and building it in ways that it's best of brand, it's nobody has ever built this kind of solution ever. Is it serving the customer the best that it can? Going back to the leadership principles, thinking about the frugality, thinking about scalability, thinking about how it actually serves the market, not necessarily always. So who and whose needs are you trying to serve with what you are building? And somebody asked me, I did similar session for another group, and somebody asked me, like, are you actually talking about these leadership principles? And it was also one of my questions when I was interviewing for the role. Do you actually talk about these? And now that I have been in this role for 2.5 years, I can safely say we talk about these daily. It's also so that we refer to those as even abbreviations. So we might say, like, which LP, so which leadership principle is this fulfilling? So it's a big part of the identity of being an Amazonian. And there are things that I would like to point out before we move forward, is that there are also things that are really, really difficult. So for example, look at the point where you talk about inventing and simplifying. How do you simplify scale to a global range? How do you are capable of being right a lot? And also there's one that is really, really challenging and very misunderstood. It's called have backbone, disagree and commit. And why is it so misunderstood? Is that we require everybody who works for us to be able to stand up and say, regardless if you're junior, senior, you can be the Amazon CEO, to say, I don't agree with you. So have that voice of saying, I don't agree with your solution. And trust me, in my past, that has been really, really difficult. So I was not the one, I don't know if it comes true, but I'm actually an introvert. So I was the one standing in the corner and thinking, like, this doesn't work at all, and then saying nothing. So that's not acceptable. If you know it doesn't work, you have to speak up. And so that's part of having backbone, disagreeing. But what about committing? And that's the part. Yep.
The thing is that I really hate that role. I never sign up to be the time officer because I hate to cut in the middle when the discussion or the conversation is so insightful and interesting. The thing is just that we have kind of reached the place where we should have a little bit of time for question and answers as well.
Yes.
And maybe if you kind of wrap up your final thoughts on this, and then we can move to that. Would that be okay?
That's fine. That's fine. So basically what I was saying, that the only challenging part with these is these have so many overlapping things. So for example, disagreeing and committing means if you're still don't disagree when the overarching majority says this is the way forward, you have to commit to the majority. So that's also one of the things that's in the DNA. So I would like to actually wrap up by taking certain learnings from along the journey, and then you can ask me anything. So this is a list. This is just one list. So some learnings from along the journey, and then I will open up for questions. So some things that I have learned is that always when you promise anything, remember that do a bit more under promising and over delivering. So that's definitely something that is helpful. As an Amazonian, I have to remind people to have hard discussions. Also say, I don't agree with you, or this is not the quality it should be. Remember to network, and the network building is a hard part, for example, for an introvert. So even if you're an introvert, try to do networking, try to find your groups, try to find those communities. Ask for what you need. And I'm meaning if you need a mentor, ask for what you need. Would you mentor me because I would need this? Don't just ask for a mentor, ask for what you need. Find what makes you passionate, find what makes you thrive. So do what you love, because that also allows you to do a role that is significant for you. And then people versus technical skill set. I would like to remind people, even though if you have the best technical skill set, that doesn't make the difference. It's about who you are as a human being. So I would rather hire a really good person who commits doing those things that they promise, rather than having the best coder that never, always over-promises, for example, or is never on time. Resiliency is a mindset, but it's also muscle that can be trained, meaning that if you have long days, challenging projects, think about what makes you thrive, what makes you resilient. How do you wake up in the morning? Is it still making sense to you as a role? Trust but verify, meaning that whatever you hear, for example, it's only 5 integrations, this is very simple. Trust that the person knows what they're talking about, but verify, is that so, by asking questions. Remember to document when you're working for this industry, whatever you hear, write it down, check, do meeting minutes, because that will actually keep you alive in this industry, and follow up on those. Always have notes, always have your documentation available. And then there's one which is a bit more softer, and then I will open up for question. Remember that we need to be also compassionate. So I know that it's a lot of hard discussion about technical roles, but also you don't know the start point that person is coming from. So our starting points are different, our life situations are different. So if you can be compassionate about people around you, learn and listen. And also first, before you change anything or anyone, or try to change anyone because you can't, understand yourself, understand your own reaction. That is a skill that is more about EQ, so emotional intelligence, than the IQ. And I would say EQ beats IQ. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. So I will open up for questions, and then also remind people, feel free to network with me. Happy to have discussions, happy to talk to you on LinkedIn, via email, whatever you like. But any questions?
Thank you so much. This has been so insightful, and there are so many different things that we were talking that would be worthwhile to dig into. And I very much also, just a comment from my side, I like that you were very encouraging, and also encourage people to look at the values that organizations have before applying, because this is very important that they align with your values.
Absolutely.
And we will be talking that in our program also in fall a bit more. But a couple of questions we have in the chat, and I believe that people are interested. Well, and also I was listening to you, I realized that the system architect role is something that's extremely fascinating, because you can combine many skills and insights from different industries, from different roles, and kind of combine and merge them to become a system analyst. But I believe that we have many people here who are just about to go to IT, and they are wondering, like, what would be the minimum viable to become a system analyst? Like, there in the chat, there's a question like, should we learn data analytics? Do we need to know coding? So what would be kind of your suggestion for the minimum viable, to become the minimum viable product for a system architect's role?
Yeah, so I would say that you can choose from 2 main paths, and those 2 main paths is that you can become a generalist. So for example, currently I'm a generalist SA, meaning that I will also touch on topics that are not specifically targeted towards like the databases. And that means that I have a really broad scope. So it's all the Amazon Web Services. But then we have specializing essays. So specializing essays means I could jump in a role where I would just lead specialized database practice, and that would be just specializing in that part, and you have a lot of work there. So what I would encourage is that if you find that area that you go like, I love this, like I mentioned, I have always loved databases. I'm like a relational database buff who loves SQL and loves the theory. Then you should go for that. Or let's say that if you like machine learning, AI, and that makes you really think like, I love this role, you could specialize in that role. You can start in the SA role by becoming an intern with us, for example. Also, I know that other companies do the same. So they have internship programs for an SA, so you don't have to be a ready-made SA. And during that internship, you can choose if you like to specialize or if you'd like to be a generalist. So I would see that those would be the paths that you can choose.
Very good insights, and I think that our participants should definitely look at the internship programs as well. I hope that they are on your website, Amazon Web Services.
Yes.
Very good. Another question that was actually thrown out in the air in the beginning by Lucia is what is Mimit Koda? I don't know if I pronounced it right, but I think that it's something that would be very interesting to our listeners.
Absolutely, and that would be a place to start your journey as a SA2. So Mimit Koda is Women Who Code in Finland, and basically it's also an international program. So I know that those who have talked about US programs, they also have Women Who Code, but it's a local program. It has about 10,000 women that are subscribing to different learning tracks. And Amazon Web Services, we have our own learning track, and it's free to use, it's free to participate, and we also support your certifying yourself into, let's say, a cloud architect associate, or let's say a cloud practitioner. So we support your journey. We give you training classes, technical, we give you exam prep, and everything is on the Mimit Koda website. We also record our sessions, so you can access the previous sessions. And the next sessions that we will start will be in the autumn, so we will do a repeat of that program. And currently, at the moment, we have now certified, if I remember correctly, about 350 individuals in Finland. And hopefully we will target much more in the upcoming months.
Is that Mimit Koda like trainings or learning materials, are there in Finnish or in English?
We do actually both at the moment, and this is actually a topic that it's also a lot more broader topic. So I would love to see much more content made available in Finland, mainly in English, due to the fact that the industry works in English. I know that there are still in many different companies, there's a lot of pushback, and that is the reason we are producing both English and Finnish. But I think eventually we will produce everything in English so that everybody has the chance to learn and get the opportunity to learn.
Really great. And to apply or to join Mimit Koda, what would a person need to do?
So you can jump in any time. Mimit Koda has a Slack, and Slack allows you to just interact with the different groups. All the recordings are on the website, and then there's a container that has all the training material for our team. And once you have gone through the trainings, recorded or live, you can then participate in certifications. And if you are part of the underrepresented community, we will pay for your certification.
Oh, that's amazing. But if you're not, so how much would that then cost approximately?
The basic level of certification without any training material, it's about $100, I think. The associate is $50, the professional is $300 for the exam itself. But then you would.
Okay, but it's also doable. I mean, long reskilling programs can cost much more, so it's a very good opportunity. Okay, but I think that we have reached a point where we need to have a little break. As Lucia said, we need to move a bit. We have still two very extremely interesting presentations coming along. So I would like to take the opportunity to thank you very much for coming today and sharing your insights and valuable suggestions with our community.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful summer, everybody. And don't be afraid to connect with me. So LinkedIn, send me a request.
Thank you, Ursula.
Thanks.
I just input your LinkedIn profile in the chat and the Mimit Koda website with the next English event, so you can find everything in the chat. And see you in the Finnish archipelago. See you in Turku, I guess.
See you.
Thank you. See you. Oh, and we have our next speakers. We have a little shorter break and a few minutes, just like drink some water, run to the toilet, and we see you at 3 o'clock sharp. Thanks a lot.